Hello and welcome to Hawk Mountain Sanctuary's Home Discovery Series. Today's program is Pennsylvania Dutch Pow Wow with Porcupine Pat McKinney, Environmental Education Coordinator of the Schuylkill Conservation District.
Hello, hello.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Porcupine Pat.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much for making this happen.
My pleasure. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank Wayne Lehman for providing technical support to make today's program possible. Wayne is the County Natural Resources Specialist for the Schuylkill Conservation District. So thank you so much, Wayne, for your help today. My name is Jamie Dawson, also known as Possum Dawson, and I'm the Director of Education at Hawk Mountain Sanctuary. We are so excited that you all are joining us today. As you may know, Hawk Mountain is the world's very first refuge for birds of prey, and we continue to work hard to be leaders in raptor conservation, science, and education locally and globally around the world. Hawk Mountain is a private nonprofit organization, and membership is the lifeblood of what we do. To all of our members, thank you so much for your continued support. It means the world to us. If you're joining us today and you're not a member, we hope that you consider becoming one in the future. Hawk Mountain hopes that everyone remains safe and healthy during these times of COVID challenges, and we are thrilled to offer our community a variety of free virtual programming. As always, Hawk Mountain greatly appreciates and depends on donations. Just so everyone is aware, today's program is being recorded. The video will then be accessible on Hawk Mountain's YouTube channel as a continued resource. We also have a link on our website directly connecting you to our YouTube channel. At any point during today's program, viewers may submit questions through the Q&A feature on the Zoom platform. We've designated time at the end of the program to take some questions from the audience. And we are so excited that Porcupine Pat McKinney is joining us today to share with us some of the cultural and historical traditions of the Pennsylvania Dutch Pow Wow. But before we get started, I'd like to take some time to share Pat's background experience with our audience. Porcupine Pat McKinney is Environmental Education Coordinator of the Schuylkill Conservation District and provides programming for people of all ages with a special emphasis on schools, nature-centered development, and public programming. Porcupine Pat is originally from Marion, Ohio, and holds a Bachelor's of Science degree with distinction in natural resources with an emphasis on environmental interpretation from the Ohio State University. He is a recipient of the prestigious Sandy Cochran Award for Excellence in Natural Resources Education from the Pennsylvania Forestry Association in 2005, the recipient of the 2007 Schuylkill Pride Award, the 2010 Schuylkill Outdoors Personality of the Year, and recipient of the 2013 Pennsylvania Association of Environmental Educators Outstanding Environmental Education Award. Wow, Porcupine Pat, you have certainly received a lot of recognition and honor for your talents and leadership in environmental education. So kudos to you. And personally, I also want to thank you for being a member of Hawk Mountain Sanctuary and for all of your support for the sanctuary. So thank you so much. So how did you become so interested in the field of environmental education?
Well, when I graduated from high school, I went to college in Chicago, and this is in the 1970s. Chicago at that time had, well, there was air pollution, the Chicago River was polluted, and you have to wonder, what were we doing to ourselves? So I was interested in one particular field, like radio and TV broadcasting and engineering. However, I said, I want something that will help make the world a better place. And what's a common denominator? So, well, the environment, no matter who you are, you have to have clean air, clean water. Well, went to Ohio State, and that's what I did. Got a degree in this, and now I've been doing this for a long, long time now.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I have to say, I've been now living in Schuylkill County for almost 2 years, and it's become clear to me that you are somewhat of a local celebrity. Everyone I meet and talk to knows Porcupine Pat, and I have to say that my daughter was so impressed when she found out that I got to work with Porcupine Pat through Hawk Mountain Sanctuary. So My question to you is, how did Pat McKinney from Ohio become the legendary Porcupine Pat of Schuylkill County?
Well, I can thank Possum Dawson here. We can say that. I can thank my experience with the Girl Scouts. I worked as a ranger with the Girl Scouts in Western Pennsylvania, had a chance to rub elbows with scouts that were actually original scouts from way back in like the 19 teens, and learned a lot from them. And of course, in scouting, you always have to have a moniker, because when you say Ranger McKinney, that sounds, well, kind of boring. What happened is a group of junior Girl Scouts, these are girls 10, 11, years old. We took them on a hike at our camp in Western Pennsylvania. And at the end of the hike, we played the name game. You think of a plant, animal that you saw on the hike that begins with the first letter of your first name. Well, like Amy would say, my name is Amy and I like the ants we saw. And, there's Mindy and she saw the muskrat swimming. So anyway, I was going to say my name is Pat and I like pine trees. Well, before I had a chance to say anything, because on our hike, we saw a porcupine taking a snooze high atop a tree. And well, they called me Porcupine Pat. So I can thank the group of junior Girl Scouts for giving me that moniker.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, we have a big audience and we're all excited to learn about the culture and history of the Pennsylvania Dutch Pow Wow. So Porcupine Pat, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, you're probably wondering, with a name like McKinney, you got to go like this. That doesn't sound Dutch. However, the Pennsylvania Dutch or Pennsylvania Deutsch, Pennsylvania Germans, they're the ones that mainly practice this. However, there were other culture groups that did practice what's called powwow. Now, you can go back in time, back to medieval times, and the thinking and the philosophy back then gave the underpinnings for basically having this type of, medicine and practices that can help improve your life. Now, keep in mind that powwow was practiced in southeastern and south central Pennsylvania for the most part, and that's primarily where the Pennsylvania Dutch are located. So they were rural, agrarian, and at one time we were more connected to the land. So what people did is they wanted to, of course, treat their injuries, treat their maladies, but also they wanted to see if they could improve their lifestyle somehow. Like, for example, making sure that their cows stay in the pasture that they have as opposed to wandering off to their neighbors. So there's powwow remedies that address those particular issues. Now, there were a number of personalities that practiced powwow, and it goes back in time. There's actually a book that when I gave a presentation at Sweeter Lake and its clubhouse, there was a woman that came up to me, and she was an older woman, and she had an original copy of John Homan's book called The Book of Powwows, The Long Lost Friend. And in that book, they had remedies for all sorts of things. This book was like the go-to book. A lot of Dutch households had that. So anyway, this man named John Homan, and I'm going to read right from here, he had a listing that he got from talking with people, but also he was what's called an indentured servant. He came over from Germany, and he actually worked his way on a farm down in the Ole Valley in Berks County. And at the time, he was called Johannes Homan. And Homan, by the way, is spelled Hohman. They don't understand why he called his book, Possum Dawson, The Book of Powwow's Long Lost Friend, because the word powwow, they attribute that to Algonquin, and they think it's because he was enamored with the Native American lore and lifestyle, because powwow is along that line. But basically, they called powwow brauche, and that's Brauche. And it has nothing to do, of course, with the Algonquin powwow. So anyway, what happened is this man, Holman, he did fractor. He did the baptismal certificates. He was very talented with that. And in the typical German household, when they had a child, it was very important to have this certificate, you know, as just part of their family. He was able to work his way out of this servitude. And then, of course, he wrote this book, and one thing leads to another. He's well renowned. But you can go back in time. Now, some of us know the song, "Deck the Halls with Boughs of Holly." Well, one would say when you have holly, that's an evergreen plant. And decking the halls, in other words, your windows and your doors with holly, that would ward off evil spirits. And that's actually paganistic. That's from, you know, thousands of years ago. So, and of course, Jamie, you probably remember singing this song. You don't step on a crack because you will
break your mother's back.
There you go. That's quote superstition that you could say that. However, some people, they would believe that. And in powwow, you had to believe that the remedy that you were offered by the powwow practitioner was going to work. So let's talk about the who, what, where, when, and why, and of course, the how. The who did it? Well, primarily is the Pennsylvania Dutch. However, there were Irish that did it, Slovaks that became powwow practitioners. Now, I'm going to name some of the personalities. Down in the Ole Valley, which I mentioned earlier, there's even a road called Mountain Mary Road. And it's named after a woman who people would go to, even from up here in Schuylkill County. They would go down to visit her because she would always have some elixir, some potion, some way for you to overcome your malady. Now, understand, this is all occurring prior to Medicare and to Medicaid, and people had really no money to, you know, pay somebody to do practicing medicine on their family. So a powwow practitioner filled that void. And a lot of instances, I have to tell you, after the quite a number of workshops that I've had, there are people that have some amazing stories. I'll never forget Mrs. Anderson. I met her when my lady friend and I were at this restaurant, and she was sitting behind us. And Mrs. Anderson has Anderson's Farm Market over in the Streetensburg area, Schuylkill County. And I had to talk with her because I asked her, were you ever powwowed? Now, she gave me that look that people would give you because you're really not supposed to talk about that, because that was considered like witchery and, you know, whatever. But what happened is, she says she was, when she was a young girl, she was vexed with a malady, like a fever. And the regular doctor came out to their farm and says, I can't do anything. They called this older man who spoke in Pennsylvania Dutch, and he came and he had a red ribbon, and he started at her toes. She was laying on her back, and he started slowly and picked up speed, and he banished 3 times. He did this 3 times to banish this malady that she had. Well, lo and behold, a few days later, she was cured. So I hear stories like that. And I know I gave this presentation down at the Berks County Heritage Center, and there's people that gave stories that they were powwow when they were very young. One common denominator was there seems to be a lot of people with warts back then. And I know that you could take the Bible and they would pow right on your hand 3 times to get rid of those warts right there, and they would disappear. So there's got to be something to that. But anyway, why did they do this? Of course, number one, they had no money, but number 2, they believed that this could work because there are so many stories of other people having been, quote, cured of their malady. Now, I like Time magazine, and I get Time magazine because the young person down the street has a subscription that helps their school and whatnot. And in Time Magazine a couple years ago, there was a story about mind over matter. And they were talking about administering placebos and then the regular medicine, and they got the same results in a lot of people. And maybe you can give that as credence for powwow. Now, I'm not trying to talk about usurping modern medicine, but this is what people had in the rural hinterlands to have as their medicine. Now, there was a famous powwow practitioner up in Hazleton. Her name was Mrs. Kennedy. Now, if you know your culture, that is not Pennsylvania Dutch. That is Irish as the day is long. And what her specialty was, and you could say this, her specialty was to focus on headaches. So if you had headaches, what you're supposed to do is take a handkerchief and wipe your forehead 3 times. And then all you had to do was put that handkerchief inside an envelope and mail it to Mrs. Kennedy, Hazleton, Pennsylvania. She was so well renowned, the post office always found her. Now, you know that she would be thinking about that. She'd be focusing on your handkerchief. And you would say, I've got somebody doing this for me. And of course, your headache hopefully went away. And a lot of people obviously thought this worked because she was very popular. There was a woman named Aunt Sophie Bailey, and she was popular back like the 1930s, 40s, and maybe early 50s. She even powwowed over the telephone, and she was from Tremont, which is north of Pine Grove. In Pottsville, there was a powwow John. And like I say, there's a number of personalities. Now, Possum Dawson, you're hearing women and men being powwow practitioners. So what did it take to become one? Well, first off, you had to be a person of good standing. You also had to be over 30. Now, you might say, oh, that's pretty young. Well, actually, remember that the average lifespan at the time was probably in their 60s, if not earlier, 50s, 60s. So that would be considered middle age. It could be a man or a woman. Now, here's what would happen. You would have a powwow practitioner that would receive a request by somebody who wanted to be trained in this. And sometimes it went from one family member to another. But it had to be crossways. Like, for example, I could teach you, Jamie. However, I could not teach Wayne, who's another man. But to get around that, which is what you can do, let's say I'm training you, Jamie, to be a practitioner, but Wayne just happens to be in the room over to the side. And you weren't supposed to be taking notes. You were supposed to memorize. So that, and if you really get into this, oh boy, you had to realize there's thousands, literally thousands of remedies. And sometimes they were counterproductive. It all depended on what they did. So basically, that's what powwow, is the background. There are some people thinking that even nowadays that powwow is still practiced in some communities. I do know that the historical societies are all about this right here. So it's an interesting cultural feature here, that's for sure. Now, I do have some sample remedies here if you'd like me to talk about them. So you're
Sounds
not
interesting.
There we go. That sounds good. Well, not only did you, get powwowed for a health condition like warts, which is what I mentioned, but you might want to be to making sure that you're safe from an angry dog. And that has happened. Jamie, I like to ride a bicycle, and I've had more than my share of dogs coming up and saying, whoa, So what you're supposed to do is, you're supposed to not look at the dog, but you're supposed to say with firm voice, you say, dog, hold thy nose to the ground. God has made me and thee hound. And the dog is supposed to go away with a firm voice like that. So now I think some of you might go fishing. Well, here's a powwow suggestion. on how to have a sure way of catching fish. You're supposed to take rose seed and mustard seed and the foot of a weasel. How about that? Yeah, you heard that right. And you hang these in a net and the fish will certainly collect there. So I guess out there you'll see weasels that will have a foot missing, and that's what they would do. Here's how to make your chickens, and I think people are having more chickens even in the towns. Here's how you can get them to lay more eggs. You take the dung of rabbits and you pound it to like a powder. Then you mix this with bran, and then you wet this mixture until it becomes lumpy. And then you take those lumps of this concoction and you feed your chickens. So maybe your 1 dozen eggs will turn into 1.5 dozens. Who knows? So, but I have to say that I'm intrigued by this right here. Here is a good cure for wounds. So if you fall and you scratch yourself, here's what they did. Take the bones of a calf and you burn them until they turn to powder, and then strew it onto this wound. Powder prevents the flesh from putrefying, in other words, going bad, and is therefore of great importance in healing this wound. Now, what you're hearing is you're finding that everything that I've mentioned so far is in a rural landscape. Understand that they didn't have a CVS, they didn't have Rite Aid drug, they didn't have that back then. They would have people peddling, going out with wagons and all that, and some of those potions were questionable, as we well know. So, but here is another one here, which I thought was interesting. To mend broken glass. Now, the glass panes that we know were actually quite the luxury for the early settlers in the frontier. So if a glass pane broke, they needed to fix it. So what they did, they took common cheese and they washed the cheese well. They took something called unslacked lime and the white of eggs, and they, of course, mixed that all up and they rubbed it well together into one big mass, and of course applied that to the glass, and it was like a glue that brought the glass pane together. So now, if you have cows, here's a way of making sure that your cattle return home. Here's a powwow suggestion. You take a handful of salt and go into your fields and make your cattle walk 3 times around the same stump or this big stone, each time keeping the cows in the same direction. That is to say, you must, have them 3 times arrive at the same location at the, the stump or the stone that you started from. And then have your cows lick the salt from that stump or that stone. And frankly, it sounded like it worked. I heard reports that in the past that some farmers, even now, they've heard of that. So, but it's interesting that, there's a wide range of different types of remedies here. And I could go on, and you can actually Google powwows for Pennsylvania Dutch. I have one here, one last one here, actually 2 more I want to give you here. This is to keep witches away from your property. What you would do is you take a bundle of St. John's wort. And this is why I got interested in this, because a lot of these remedies involved natural items like plants that you had around here. And St. John's wort was in bloom right now. And you hang that over the door of your house or barn, and that would keep the witches away, the bad witches, let's put it that way. Now, for easing pain, here's what you would do. You would hold a hand, the powwow practitioner will hold that person's hand over the painful area and recite 3 times, holy, holy chicken dirt. Tomorrow morning, it won't hurt. And then you blow on the area 3 times. Okay, Possum Dawson, let's say that you contacted me and you said, I've been vexed by headaches. Okay, So you would call me as a powwow practitioner, and I would come to your home, and what you would say, I've had these headaches here. So of course I would have that one remedy there. All right, let's say 6 months later, you're saying, oh my God, the headaches have returned and they're even worse than before. Well, my second routine would be more emphatic, and I would look at you and I would, go around you 3 times. Right, a year later, you call again, you have horrible headaches. This time, I might even shake you, and I might look you in the eye and really get fervent. So in essence, when you do the practice, you'll have like an easy, a moderate, and then a high octane level, let's put it that way. So that's what they did. And well, basically that's the gist of what I have here. And I'm curious to see if there's any questions or comments. I'm curious.
Yes, people from viewing in the audience, please feel free to write in if you have anything you want to share or questions. And Porcupine Pat, that was fascinating. And we all know that the Pennsylvania Dutch is such a prominent culture surrounding the Hawk Mountain area. So it's just amazing to hear these traditions and these beliefs. And I'm wondering, I know you said the historical societies do a lot with the powwow today. And I know that you mentioned it's also something that people don't speak about, perhaps. Do you believe that there are powwow practitioners still active today, perhaps underground?
But I would think there are, there's people that would do that. One thing I did neglect to mention, though, powwow practitioner would not get paid any money. They feel that receiving money would diminish their powers that they have. But what would happen is, let's say that, Jamie, I came out to your place and, I came 3 times. Now, maybe each time you would say, okay, look over there to the counter. There's like a dozen eggs from my chickens. And that's how you would pay me. And I know that there was a Mr. Brensinger who lives in the Lewistown Valley area here in Schuylkill County. And he had told me that he was powwow when he was a young lad for warts. And a man had contacted him. Actually, they met at a bar. Let's put it that way. They met his father and this young boy here. And anyway, the powwow practitioner was paid with a few glasses of beer. Let's put it that way.
That's a great payment, in my opinion.
Yeah, there we go.
Wow. So we did have a comment come in. I did want to share. Someone wrote in, they're curious to know if there are any known practitioners in Lebanon County who are open to teaching.
Boy, that's a good question. I don't know of any practicing powwow practitioners like that, but there is. I know at Hamburg at the field house, there's like an expo that they would have, and it's like a new agey type expo, and I think it might be at the end of the year in November, and I believe you would find people that would be able to get you in contact with people like that, because there's new age stuff and there's folk medicine and there's a whole wide range. So pay attention to what's going on at the field house. However, with COVID-19, will this take place? You don't know.
Isn't that the truth? That's the truth. Hey, Porcupine Pat, we have another question that came in. Did these remedies and traditions arise in immigrants, European roots, or were they homegrown?
In my opinion, they were, they come from the roots from, as my mother would say, I know I have an Irish name, but actually I'm half Croatian, and my mother would call it Stari Kraj, the old country. Some of them would come from over there. For example, we have Groundhog Day. That was a tradition brought over from Germany, and actually they worked with badgers, so, but anyway, a lot came from overseas, but then, in my opinion, I know they fine-tuned it for here, for what we had around here.
Thank you. And I'm wondering, I know that you mentioned that when practitioners were teaching, the students were not allowed to take notes and everything had to be memorized. And that in itself, wow, what a task. That's super impressive.
Yes.
Right? Wow. Because nowadays, without looking at our phone for anything, it's hard to remember things. So I guess my thought is, as it seems like an oral tradition and not much written record, is there any concern that if this practice and teaching is not continued, that it could disappear if it's not recorded?
Well, I go back to that book, The Long Lost Friend.
Right.
And there you'll find, now it's written in early 1800s English. In other words, there's a page and a half that would be just one sentence. So it's a very hard read. But you can actually, and just what I just read, I found this online. And again, let's see, I would say, just the best thing to do would be to Google Pennsylvania Dutch Pow Wow and see what you come up with. And I know you can go to YouTube and there's people that will even give presentations on there. Now, I want to underscore that this does not replace mainstream medicine. I want you to understand that. And, but it's interesting to note that this is something that I think could supplement. I do know that in that Berks County Heritage Center audience, there was a doctor there. And he was intrigued by this, but also he appreciated the fact that I didn't lambaste the traditional medical community. They are called general practitioners. You do know that. It doesn't mean general absolutionists, meaning that one treatment for one modern day malady that we would get might not work as well on somebody else. So they in turn practice medicine too. But it is nice to incorporate and enhance and supplement, but as long as it's done safely.
Right. Good point. And we just had a bunch of questions come in, so I'm going to go through them. What year did John Hallman come here, and was he an indentured servant before he came to America?
Okay, I would suspect that when you're an indentured servant, that contract occurred when you were still overseas. So you were brought over, and then this would be like in the early 1800s. So that's really I would say Google Long Lost Friend Book of Powwows, and that will take you right to him. And, again, it's a hard read, but it was interesting to have this book in my hand from the, early 1800s to middle 1800s, that somebody had it in their family.
Yeah, that's amazing, that history. Okay, next question. Is there also concern that because it's an oral tradition that things have been misunderstood over the years, such as the whisper down the lane syndrome?
Oh boy, you bet. I do know that they say history has a chance to repeat itself and repeat itself and repeat itself. It's just like right now with the masks that we wear. There's Colleen Hoptack, a good friend of mine who writes for the South Schuylkill News. In the latest issue, there's a good story about how back in 1918, there were people that really were upset that they had to wear a mask. And everything that's from 1918 is repeated today. So, but then of course, as time goes on, people's memories diminish, and I'm sure they might take some shortcuts and whatnot. It all depends. It's the nature of the human condition.
Yeah, good point, good point. Okay, next question. What is the rationale for allowing a practitioner to teach only a member of the opposite gender?
Well, it's almost like, why do you genuflect? Why do you go like this? It's just the way it is. It had to be like woman to a man, man to a woman. It's just the way it was. I can't fully explain it, but I do know that a lot of answers, I could give you all sorts of answers, but that's just how they did it. Keeping in mind that they got around that. It's almost like, Possum Dawson, I like to bicycle. And in Lancaster County, I was bicycling on a beautiful backcountry farmland type road. And all of a sudden, in the middle of nowhere, there's a telephone booth. I'm like, why is there a telephone booth here? Well, I'm in Amish country. Well, Amish are not supposed to use telephones, but not inside their home. But they can walk to a telephone booth and make a phone call from there. So there are ways to get around that.
Got you. Thank you so much. I think that's all the questions we have for now. So that is so fascinating. And Porcupine Pat, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge on this subject. It's just so interesting. So thank you so much. Thank you to our wonderful audience for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, we thank you so much, Pat. You're the best. Our audience, thank you for joining us. And we have many more virtual programs coming your way soon, and a sneak peek for the next week or so. This Friday, June 19th, we have Learning Birdsong by Habitat with Holly Merker at 4:00 p.m. Next Wednesday, June 24th, we have Adventures in Antarctica with Cody Bauman at 1:00 p.m. Next Thursday, June 25th, we have Sanctuary Storytime, Zoe Finds a Fawn with Peggy Sue Hentz at 11:00 a.m. And on Friday, June 26th, we have Benefit for the Birds live program, Support the Sanctuary, and Save the American Kestrel. So thank you all so much. We hope to see you again soon. And a reminder, our trails at Hawk Mountain are open. So check out our website. We're trying to encourage people to buy trail passes online. And we also have some modifications for social distancing and things like that. All that information is on our website. And Porcupine Pat, lots of comments are coming in saying, thank you. This was so interesting. So again, thank you so much. Sure. And take care, everyone. And we hope to see you again soon.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.